I cut contact with my mother in my mid-20s after years of unrecognised emotionally abusive behaviour and neglect. And I'm not alone. There is a quiet epidemic happening inside family homes all over the world, and most people are only hearing one side of it. Adult children, some in their 20s, some in their 40s, some even older, are making the devastating decision to cut contact with their parents. And the parents, many of them are completely blindsided. They tell their friends they have no idea why. They post in online groups saying their child just disappeared from their life without warning. But here's the thing, that is almost never the full story. Today, we're going to talk about what is really going on, because this subject is deeply personal to me. And after years of working with families navigating estrangement, I believe this conversation is long overdue. Before we dive in, I want to be honest with you about who I am and why I am qualified to talk about this. I'm a chartered psychologist and I specialise in working with family estrangement. My work focuses on supporting clients who are either estranged or on the brink of estrangement, and I work toward reconciliation only where that is possible and healthy. I hold space for both sides of this experience. I understand the grief of a parent who has lost contact with their child. I understand the complexity, the confusion, and the shame that comes with that. I too am a parent, but I also understand from the inside what it feels like to be the adult child who reaches breaking point, because I have been there myself. I eventually made the decision to cut contact with my own mother after years of what I can only describe as neglectful, emotionally abusive behaviour. Years of raising concerns, years of trying to be heard, years of hoping things would change, and ultimately arriving at the painful conclusion that continuing contact was causing me more harm than I could sustain. That experience, as brutal as it was, fundamentally shaped how I support my clients today. I bring both clinical framework and the lived reality to this work, and that combination is what allows me to speak about this with both precision and genuine empathy. So if you're a parent who's estranged from your child, or you're worried that estrangement might be on the horizon, please stay with me. This video is not here to blame you. It is here to help you understand something that could genuinely transform your relationship if you're willing to hear it. And if you're an adult child who has experienced estrangement or is currently considering it, I want you to know that what you have felt is valid. Your experience deserves to be taken seriously, and you're not alone. So let's get into it. The question I get asked more than almost any other in my work is this: why is this happening so much? Why are so many adult children cutting off their parents? And what I find fascinating, and frankly a little heartbreaking, is that the answer depends entirely on who you ask. Ask the parent, and the story often sounds like a sudden, inexplicable abandonment. Ask the child, and what you hear is something else entirely. You hear about a long, exhausting history, a timeline that stretches back years, sometimes decades, a series of moments, conversations, confrontations, silences, and disappointments that accumulated slowly until the weight of it became unbearable. And this is one of the most important things I want you to take away from this video. Estrangement is almost never the result of a single incident. It is the result of a pattern. It's the final chapter of a story that has been building over a very long time. And I know this personally. Growing up with a mother who was emotionally neglectful and at times abusive meant that I spent years not fully trusting my own perceptions. I would feel hurt and then immediately question whether I had the right to feel hurt. I would try to raise something that bothered me and then walk away from the conversation feeling like I was the problem. That is what sustained invalidation does. And for a long time, I minimized it. I explained it away. I kept trying to find a version of that relationship that would work. But then I became a mother, and becoming a mother completely reframed my experience of emotional abuse and neglect with my own mother. Because the love I now felt for my children was immediate. It was fierce and deeply protective. Their emotional safety, their feelings mattered instinctively. And from that newly attained perspective as a mother myself, my own mother's behaviour made even less sense to me than it had ever before. It opened up fresh wounds because I could no longer explain away the neglect. I could no longer minimise the emotional harm in the same way that I once had. And I found myself thinking, how could you treat your child that way? How could you repeatedly wound someone that you were supposed to protect and love? That shift was painful, but it was also clarifying. For the first time, I fully understood that what I had experienced was not normal, and it was not something I wanted my own children growing up around. And this is where so many parents feel completely blindsided, not because they necessarily weren't given any signals, but because the signals were not being received in the way they were intended. Let me explain what I mean by that. When an adult child tries to raise a concern with a parent, they're often doing something incredibly vulnerable. They are opening the door and saying, this hurt me, this affected me, I need us to address this so we can have a better relationship. That takes courage. It takes a willingness to risk conflict in service of connection. But what happens in so many of the families is that the parent's response to that vulnerability shuts the door. It might look like defensiveness. It might look like minimizing the child's experience. It might look like turning the conversation back to the parent's own pain. It might look like complete denial. And when that door gets shut enough times, the adult child eventually stops knocking. Not because they have given up on the parent, but because the cost of knocking has become too high. Think about what it takes to go to someone you love, someone who is supposed to be in your corner, and say, the way you treated me has caused pain. And then to hear in response, you're being too sensitive, or I did the best I could, or you always make everything about you, or perhaps the most dismissive of all, I don't remember it that way. Imagine hearing that not once, but over and over again across months and years. What does that do to a person? What does that do to their sense of their own reality? What does that do to the fundamental trust that should exist between a parent and a child? The clinical term for this kind of invalidation is emotional dismissal, and its effects are profound. And when our emotional experiences are consistently denied or minimized by the people who are supposed to know us best and love us most, it creates a particular kind of wound. It tells us that our inner world is not trustworthy. It tells us that our pain is not real or significant, and over time, that messaging becomes internalized. It doesn't just affect the relationship with the parent, it ripples out across every area of the person's life. It affects how they relate to partners, how they parent their own children, and how they show up in the world. Yet that is the experience of so many adult children who eventually choose estrangement. They don't arrive at that decision light. They arrive at it after what is often years of effort, years of therapy, trying to understand their own reactions, years of giving the parent another chance, years of modifying their own behaviour, setting gentle limits, trying different approaches. The estrangement is not the abandonment. The estrangement is the surrender. It's the moment the adult child finally accepts that the relationship as it currently stands is causing them genuine harm, and that harm is not going to change. And this is where I want to talk directly to parents, because I think this is the piece that gets missed most catastrophically. The moment your child tries to tell you that they're hurting, that moment is a gift. It might not feel like a gift. It might feel like an attack. It might feel unfair. It might feel like they're rewriting history. But if your child is coming to you and saying, I need to talk about how some of the things in our relationship have affected me, they're still reaching for you. They still want connection. They still believe on some level that you're capable of hearing them. That's a gift. Accept it. The mistake so many parents make in that moment is prioritizing their own emotional comfort over the relationship itself. Defensiveness feels protective, but over time, it erodes connection, because what the adult child hears when you get defensive is, my pain is less important to you than your need to see yourself as a good parent. And that is a devastating message received from someone who is supposed to love you unconditionally. And I want to be clear about something here, because I think this is so important. I'm not suggesting that adult children are always right in their interpretation of events. I'm not suggesting that parents are always the villain. Families are complicated. Perceptions differ. People carry their own histories and traumas into their parenting, and most parents are doing the best they can with what they have. And I genuinely believe that. I know this as a parent myself, and I've made plenty of mistakes. But doing the best you can does not automatically mean doing no harm. And the willingness to acknowledge that you might have caused harm, even unintentionally, is not the same as accepting that you're a terrible person. It's actually a sign of tremendous strength and love. What changes relationships is not perfection. It is accountability. It is the parent who can sit with their child and say, I hear that I hurt you, and I am sorry, and I want to understand more about that. That sentence, genuinely delivered, without defensiveness, without caveats, can move mountains. But so many parents can't get that, not because they're bad people, but because taking full responsibility for harm feels like annihilation. It feels like admitting they were a bad parent, which feels like admitting they're a bad person, and that feels unsurvivable. What I try to help parents understand in my work is that accountability isn't self-destruction. You can have been a loving parent and caused harm. These two things can be simultaneously true. They are not mutually exclusive. You can have worked incredibly hard and still fallen short in some important ways. Acknowledging that doesn't erase all the good. It actually makes the good more visible, because it shows your child that you care more about their reality than about protecting your self-image. But when that acknowledgement never comes, when the parent continues to deny, minimize, or deflect time after time, year after year, something changes in the adult child. The hope that originally drove their attempts to repair the relationship start to erode. And once hope erodes, the calculation shifts. Because at that point, they are no longer weighing the pain of the relationship against the potential for things to improve. And this is a big problem. They are then weighing the ongoing pain of contact against the pain of walking away. And for many, walking away eventually starts to feel like the lesser of two very real harms. I reached that point myself. After years of trying, after years of absorbing the impact of my mother's behaviour, after years of making excuses for it and hoping it would change, I came to understand that continuing contact was not neutral. It was actively harmful. Every interaction left me depleted and destabilised and questioning myself in ways that were not sustainable. Cutting contact with a parent comes with a particular kind of loss, though. And that loss is hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it. It's a grief that does not follow the usual rules, because the person you're grieving is still alive. You grieve the parent you needed and didn't have. You grieve the relationship you wanted. You grieve the hope of repair. And you grieve again at every family milestone, every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday, when you see someone else's relationship with their mother and feel the absence of what you never had. I have cried for my mother, not for the mother she was, but for the mother I always hoped she might become. That grief is something I continue to hold, and I think it is important for people to know that choosing estrangement doesn't mean you stop loving the person. It often means you love yourself enough to stop being destroyed by the relationship. Now, I want to bring this back to something practical, because I think the most important thing I can do in this video is help parents understand what they can do if they find themselves estranged or on the edge of estrangement. Because there are things that help, and there are things that make the situation significantly worse. The worst thing you can do, and I see this happen all the time, is to respond to an adult child's estrangement by focusing on your own pain to the exclusion of understanding theirs. When parents tell anyone who will listen how abandoned they feel, when they recruit other family members to take sides, when they send messages that center on their own hurt, rather than demonstrating any genuine curiosity about what their child has experienced, they are not moving towards reconciliation. They are cementing the reasons the adult child felt they had to leave in the first place. The adult child who has finally chosen to protect themselves by stepping back does not need to hear how much pain the parent is in right now. What they need, if there is ever going to be any route back, is evidence that something has shifted. Evidence that the parent has genuinely reflected. Evidence that the pattern might be different this time. And that evidence doesn't come from emotional appeals or pressure or guilt. It comes from changed behavior over time, from accountability that feels real, not performed, and from a willingness to give the adult child space and autonomy in the process. If you are a parent in this situation, I want to gently encourage you to seek your own therapeutic support. Not so you can learn how to win your child back, but so that you can do the genuinely difficult work of looking at your own patterns, your own history, your own wounds, and understanding how those might have shown up in your parenting. That is hard work. It requires you to sit with some uncomfortable truths, but it is also the only work that creates the conditions for real change. And real change is the only thing that opens the door. And if you're an adult child watching this, whether you are currently in contact with a difficult parent or whether you are somewhere in the estrangement journey yourself, I want you to hear this. You're not obligated to maintain a relationship that's harming you. Love does not require self-sacrifice to the point of destruction. Setting a limit on contact, whether that is temporary or permanent, is a valid response to a relationship that has not been safe for you. It does not make you ungrateful. It does not make you cruel. It makes you someone who has taken their own well-being seriously, perhaps for the first time. Healing from the kind of childhood wounds that lead to estrangement is its own long journey, and it is not linear, it is not tidy, but it is possible. And I can tell you from my own experience that stepping back from a relationship that was consistently hurting me created space in my life that I had not known was missing. Space to better understand myself, space to parent from a more grounded place, space to build relationships that were reciprocal and nurturing, and space to begin the work of healing those early wounds rather than constantly reopening them. The rise in adult children cutting contacts with parents is not a cultural trend towards selfishness or entitlement, despite what some commentators would have you believe. It's something more significant than that. It reflects a generation of adults who have access to psychological understanding of that previous generations didn't have, who have a language now for their experiences that their parents may not have had the words for, and who are choosing perhaps for the first time in their family line to say, this pattern stops with me. That is not abandonment. That is not cruelty. In many cases, it's an act of profound courage and love directed inward and forward toward the next generation. Because the parent who does their healing work, who breaks the cycle, who learns to repair rather than deny, that parent gives their children and grandchildren something that ripples forward through time. Estrangement is a signal. It isn't a verdict. It is not the final word on who you are as a parent or who your child is as a person. It's a signal that something in the relationship has needed attention for a long time, and that attention didn't arrive. The question is what you choose to do with that signal when you receive it. Before you go, there's one more thing I want to leave you with. The research on family reconciliation shows that whether estrangement becomes permanent or often comes down to one specific psychological capacity, not who was right, not who loved harder, not even the severity of the conflict itself. It's a particular capacity that determines whether conversations create repair or create an even deeper split and rupture. And in my next video, I'm going to break down exactly what that is and why some people struggle with it so profoundly, and why understanding it changes the entire conversation around estrangement. So if you want to be here for that, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.